Troy Pride Jr. is a sleeper that we will be watching during minicamp. Who else will we be watching? We'll tell you next.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. You can also check me out over on the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. And joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. And on today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including, should the Cowboys sign Jaire Alexander? What's the difference between OTAs and minicamps? But let's start with this question from Evan. Landon, he wants to know, can you give me one sleeper on each side of the ball to watch during minicamps who could also make or could potentially make the 53-man roster?
All right, let's start on defense, okay? Because
Okay.
I do think defense to me is the spot where you're most likely to see this guy. It feels like the offensive roster for a large portion of it until you get to, 2 or 3 deep at a certain spot is pretty well set, or at least, sleepers I think are going to be harder to find. So for me on the defensive side of the ball, there's 2 guys that I think that I'm going to be looking out for. And I don't know that I think these are 2 good sleepers. I don't know if these are, or at least one of them would be so great as someone to watch for minicamp because of the position, but we'll get to that. My first guy is Keemon Hall, the cornerback from nickelback from, he's played with San Francisco in 2024. I'm sorry, 2023. The Cowboys picked him up some point during the middle of the season last year, and he played a lot of snaps just as part of that platoon of cornerbacks that was, rotating in while the Cowboys were dealing with all those injuries. And I thought that Keemon played really good football when he was out there. I mean, all things considered, where we got him off the street, that sort of thing. And he is more of a nickelback. He's a little bit undersized as compared to what the Cowboys usually like in their cornerbacks. However, considering the need there, considering that they don't really have that position, sewn up quite yet, and they're kind of throwing a bunch of darts at the spot, why wouldn't Keemon Hall be one of those darts? And again, having had experience playing in that spot with these guys, I think may give him a little bit of a leg up that, he may be missing in the athletic youth department that, some of these other folks have. But I just think he's a guy I'm going to keep my eye on because I thought he played good football last year.
Yeah, and I'm going to go same position. Troy Pride Jr., who the Cowboys signed. I don't remember, at some point last year. He was a former 4th-round pick from the Panthers. He's kind of bounced around the league a little bit, but I actually thought he played pretty well in the final 2 games of the season. He played like 60 snaps against Washington, held up pretty well. This is somebody who has experience playing on the outside, in the slot. Now, mostly outside snaps, but he's got the frame to play inside if you need him to. And I just think there's going to be one of these veteran cornerbacks, whether it's Keemon Hall, Troy Pride Jr., Andrew Booth. Had to take a big gulp before he said Andrew Booth. That's going to make this roster because you have Trayvon Diggs rehabbing from an injury. I have doubts that Savon Ravel, the Cowboys' 3rd-round pick, is going to play a lot early in the year. I think they're going to want to have probably a veteran out there. So one of these guys is going to be on the roster. It's just which one picks up the scheme the fastest and which one can contribute on special teams.
Yeah, just to kind of square that peg, I just looked it up, and he was picked up in December of 2024 to added to the practice squad. Just one of those guys that the Cowboys, are when they're churning the bottom of the roster, they're looking for guys. He was just a guy they picked up off the street, and I think that they were probably glad they had him, or that they added him because they've obviously added a lot of bodies to that room. And they don't want to get into a situation where they did last year, and I think. You nailed it. Like even going into this situation with 2 corners that are kind of penciled in as your starters being injured,
and Josh Butler. Don't forget Josh Butler as well.
And absolutely, yeah. And so like even the numbers depth has some injuries to it. I think it was probably good to just have a number of solid bodies out there. And I think Troy Pride's a guy that I really, I thought looked pretty decent coming out of Notre Dame. I viewed him as kind of a mid-round, guy, that developmental guy. He's been in the league for a little bit now. He's 27. So, this is going to be a good opportunity for him to make himself a little bit of money if he can come in here and show out in training camp. Maybe obviously not taking a starter spot, but maybe he can come in there and give you some snaps while some of these other guys are injured and play himself into a little bit 1 year prove it deal with somebody.
It's not that unusual to see these guys wait till age 26, 27, 28 before they become, average, competent players. I think Josh Butler is even an example of that last year, where it took Josh Butler a long time to finally get a shot and played pretty well. It's unfortunate he got injured, but we'll see. Let's go to the offensive side of the ball. Who do you got as a potential sleeper that could make the roster?
Yeah, well, I mean, much kind of similar to, my defensive pick. This is a guy who I think probably because of the name, I kind of constantly was getting confused. But Kelvin Harmon is a guy that another similar situation.
What year
right?
is it? I need the meme.
Yeah.
What year?
Another 28-year-old guy who has kind of bounced around the league a little bit, right? And I think he's just a guy who kind of came in again during this series of platooning guys in to take over for injury, that came in and showed us some pretty decent snaps at certain points during the year. So I don't know that I think there's just a lot of uncertainty at the wide receiver position, and as everything beyond Pickens is kind of up for grabs to a large degree. I think Tolbert probably solidified his spot, and I think that obviously someone like Turpin is going to make the team because of special teams. But outside of that, like, nothing is necessarily promised to any of the rest of those wide receivers. We've talked about Mingo a lot in the context of, before Pickens was here, he was a guy that was going to get a shot. Now I would say that room is even more wide open. So if a guy comes in here and just has a really good series of minicamp practices, has a good training camp, there's a good chance that he could potentially be on this roster or potentially, maybe a practice squad guy that gets called up a lot during the season. And I think Kelvin Harmon has at least proven that he's within striking distance of that kind of role.
So I think we know the top 5 receivers on this team: CeeDee Lamb, George Pickens, Jalen Tolbert, Kevontae Turpin, and then probably Jonathan Mingo as that 5th spot. Like, I would be shocked if those aren't your top 5. The question is, do they keep a 6th receiver? And if they do, that's where it's going to be really interesting to see what type of receiver do they pick. Do they go with someone like Jalen Brooks, a bigger body guy that has experience on special teams? Do they go with someone like Kelvin Harmon? Or do they go with somebody like Jalen Cropper landed?
Yeah, Cropper. I mean, look, I was telling you before the show, like, it does feel like it may be early to start talking about Cropper, but you're not wrong. Like, this is the time of year where Cropper shows out. And look, I mean, Cropper is another one of those guys, right? Where maybe just a little bit later in his career development, right? Just like it's not like we haven't seen a steady diet of Cropper every June for the last 3 or 4 years, but at some point, right? Like, at some point you wonder, does it finally kind of click to the point where he's able to find consistency? Because that's been the issue with a guy like Cropper, right? Is that it's been about like trying to find a way to transition what we've seen in minicamp and training camp into the regular season. And that's the step where it feels like he's fallen short these last few years, and he still kind of needs to take a step. Does another year do that? It'll be interesting to see.
Don't forget, we talked about special teams last week. They just don't really have a backup kick returner, punt returner. Maybe that's how Cropper makes the roster, or maybe he's, a game day scratch, but he's on the 53-man roster because he can wear a bunch of different hats between returner, slot receiver, outside receiver. He even has some quarterback experience in his background, right? Like that, you don't want to ever have to use it there, but you get the point. Like, he can just do a lot of different jobs. Don't be surprised if going into year 3, this is the season that it finally clicks. All right, we have to talk about Jaire Alexander, the Pro Bowl cornerback who the Packers released on Monday. Will the Cowboys have any interest? Should they? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment? It's easy to lose track, but that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, all of your investments and spending in one place so you can stop managing your money and start building your wealth. My family has been using Monarch Money for most of this year, and I was realizing how much money we are spending on pointless stuff like food delivery, coffee runs, football cards, whatever it is. But now we have taken control of our finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That is monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Landon, we got to talk about Jaire Alexander, who was a hot topic button issue on Monday. Jaire Alexander released by the Packers after failing to trade him. He's a free agent, pretty loaded free agent class right now, and
Yeah,
you're only going to get better when Jalen Ramsey gets moved. But is Alexander somebody the Cowboys should go after?
I think they need to examine the situation for sure, like just to see what his number is and what his health is. But I don't know. Like it's a tricky situation with a lot of variables to it, right? And most importantly, that Jaire Alexander's played less than I think 500 snaps the last 2 seasons combined. So
rough.
That's really rough, right? Like, and again, in a situation like we've just described, where the Cowboys already have 2 guys that you have questionable injury situations, do you really want to like sign a guy to a deal that, and look, I have to imagine it's going to be a decent-ish deal, like maybe not a break the bank deal, but it's also probably not going to be like 1 year, $5 million either. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I
have a hard time believing. I think whatever team signs him is going to give him an incentive-based contract with at least some guaranteed money up front.
Because I just think that there's the need is too strong. Even though you're right, the demand is like the supply is a little bit high right now, if all things considered. The demand is also still somehow very high. Like teams just need starting level cornerbacks, right? So, and I do think that if you get Alexander, and if you can squint your eyes and believe that he can stay healthy for a season, that you could be getting like a borderline Pro Bowler, maybe better than that, on your team this upcoming year. But it is truly a gamble, and I feel like for the cost that it's going to require to get him, it may not be a gamble that's worth it for the Cowboys because of their already kind of tenuous injury situation at cornerback. I understand it's probably better to have more horses, more dart throws at that situation, but I think I would probably prefer, I wasn't a big fan of the whole Ramsey situation, but if you're giving me a choice between the two and they have to do one or the other, I probably would prefer Ramsey, just because at this point I wouldn't mind paying a little bit extra, whether that's in draft capital and, cap space, just for the a better feeling of certainty that the player would be able to kind of play the snaps that I need him to until Trayvon Diggs comes back and this team's at full health.
Not only that, and I agree with you. I think Ramsey's the better option if the Cowboys were going to go out and do this. But I also think Ramsey's game is going to age better, because I've always felt like as Ramsey ages, he can either maybe play in the slot and be a more physical slot corner, or he can move to safety, which I think is probably where he's going to be here pretty soon. That's where Jason Garrett thought he should be back in the 2016 draft. But I've always thought, hey, if it doesn't work out at corner, you're always going to have this awesome safety that can help you cover tight ends and all that kind of stuff. With Alexander, the Packers aren't moving on from him just because they didn't feel like he's living up to the $16 million a year contract. They're giving up on him because his injury history is significant. Listen to all these injuries just since 2020. He had a broken thumb in 2020. He had a concussion November 5th, 2020. He had a shoulder injury in 2021 that cost him 13 games the rest of that season. 2022, he had a groin injury. 2023, he had a shoulder injury that cost him 6 games. He came back for the Cowboys playoff game. Last year, he had a groin injury, and then he had a foot injury later in the year. Like, it's a significant injury history at this point. And the Packers were talking about like, hey, we just got used to playing without Jaire Alexander, and he wouldn't practice because he was so beat up. And the history of these corners that have all these injuries by age 28, 29, they don't age well in the NFL. Like once these smaller guys start to lose their quickness and their ability to tackle because of shoulder injuries, they're done pretty fast.
Yeah, and I think that's that's where I'm at, is that this guy feels like, I think all these situations have warts, right? Like, I mean, the top three guys to me in eligible, or four, let's say four, we'll throw in Samuel in there, right? We don't know what the deal is with Asante Samuel's health, right? His neck injury.
It doesn't sound great. Yeah,
that doesn't sound great.
Pretty rough right now.
Stephon Gilmore is like, is 36 years old or whatever it is.
Something like that,
he
yeah.
might be older than that. So certainly that, but he'll be cheap, right? Like, so I think cheaper relative to some of these other guys, right? Ramsey, you have to pay a lot for, right? Like not only the cost, but you have to trade for him, which is, probably not a ton to trade for, but it's still
probably day 3
right?
pick, right? Yeah.
Right. Jaire Alexander is a little bit pricey, probably because the potential talent is maybe as high or higher than some of these other folks. But I mean, there's a reason he's being released. The injury history is significant, and there's a chance that you may not even see any of this guy, in a real way. So they all have warts. It's really about what the fit of what your team is looking for. And for the Cowboys, I just think some of these other scenarios are more tenable. And on top of that I don't necessarily accept the premise that the Cowboys need to add like absolutely have to add a cornerback at this situation if they feel comfortable with this. So I do think that, when also adding in, hey, let's see some of this young talent play out a little bit, like it just doesn't seem so tenable that Alexander would end up in the Cowboys when there's so many other options and folks that are probably more willing to pay him more money and a longer term deal. The Cowboys aren't going to sign him to a longer term deal because they've got youth that they want to serve. So I just don't know that it's going to end up with the Cowboys.
I wouldn't be surprised if Jaire Alexander works out incredibly well for some team, whether that's like Baltimore or Buffalo, a team that has cornerback depth that is able to survive if he misses half of the year, or maybe just try to save him for the back half of the season, right? But for the Cowboys, who already have so many injuries in their cornerback room, Diggs, Ravel, Josh Butler, Kalen Carson, who's not practicing, I don't know if they can afford to have another cornerback on their roster that they're paying, let's say, even adequate money. Let's say it's $8 million a year. I mean, I think he's going to get more than that, but let's say it's $8 million a year for a guy that's already beat up and you don't know what his status is for week 1 and moving forward. I just don't think this is the right situation for Dallas. But again, I wouldn't be surprised if it works out for somebody else that can be more patient with his timeline.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is about fit, and I just think that we're, matching famous names to the Cowboys positions where they may have need, but I don't know that it's necessarily a great, schematic fit. I don't know if it's a great, kind of timeline fit, because like I said, what we said about the injuries the Cowboys already have. If anything, the Cowboys need more certainty, more of a floor to kind of provide with some veteran signings. So that's not necessarily Jaire Alexander.
No, I agree with you. All right, let's talk about mini camps versus OTAs. The Cowboys kick off their mandatory mini camp on Tuesday. How different is it from what we've seen over the last couple of weeks? We'll tell you next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting Show. As training camps get closer and moves are being made, host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. All right, this final question from Luke Key wants to know, what's the difference between mini camps and OTAs? Is there tackling? Is there not tackling? What's going on here?
Well, yeah, OTAs, minicamp is what the common fan thinks OTAs is, right? Like minicamp is where everybody is required to be at these kind of pre-training camp practices. And this is where a lot of the real install starts to happen, right? Like OTAs is kind of getting folks acclimated, getting folks used to how they practice. They probably will do some base install stuff. But now that they have the whole team in there, and the idea is that with minicamp, that everybody should be up to speed on the same level, right? Like the rookies should be mixed in with the vets at this point. And so they're actually going to get some real work done, kind of, doing some actual installs. I do think that we get a little bit better insight, that, at least compared to OTAs. Some of the pecking order stuff, I wouldn't necessarily call it a training camp situation. I'm sorry, a depth chart situation yet. But I would say that you kind of at least get an idea of who's running together, like maybe at least how they're going to start some of the things of the rotations, like the running back position. We'll get a couple of glimpses at who's playing nickel corner for them, how often they're moving that person around. It's just a little bit better insight into what they are working on, because it does feel like OTAs is just very, gleaned over. It's just, I mean, really, you're just getting pictures of guys, and trying to get, idea of where their bodies are in comparison to last year. But now you're actually getting video. You actually can, have guys, reporters, beat reporters observing what's happening. So you just get a little bit better insight, and they're doing a lot more kind of football stuff, but there is no tackling. There's no full pads. So this isn't training camp.
Everything is still at half speed. There's not one-on-ones and all that kind of stuff. 3 differences that I found. Number 1, minicamp is mandatory. There you go. OTAs are not. Number 2, a lot of the minicamp practices, if not all of them, are open to the media. Whereas for OTAs, it's generally just once a week. At least that's what the Cowboys have been doing over the last couple of years. And then the final thing is that you can actually practice multiple days in a row at minicamp. Now, the Cowboys have practices scheduled, I believe, on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. A little secret, these minicamps never go 3 days. They never practice all 3 days in a row. Generally, what happens, and you'll see this across the league, assuming the first 2 days go fairly well, and why wouldn't they? They're running around in helmets and shorts. They'll give them that 3rd day off, and they're off for the summer. That's it. That's the only differences in between minicamp and OTA. So it sounds like it's a big deal. It's not.
No, it's, if anything, it's just that it's not like the job on the other side of the door has gotten more active. It's that our keyhole has gotten a little bit bigger to see exactly what they're doing. So yeah, it's just a better insight for us versus OTAs.
And honestly, probably the most important thing about minicamps is that it's mandatory. And we saw this happen today with Micah Parsons and Trayvon Diggs, both reported to the Star on Monday. They'll be there all the week. Diggs obviously won't practice. Parsons probably won't either. He'll be on the field. I wouldn't be surprised if he's more of a non-participant. But where we've seen across the league is like Trey Hendrickson for the Bengals did not show up. TJ Watt for the Steelers did not show up. Those guys are subjected to massive fines. They can rack up over $100,000 worth of fines for missing 3 days of camp. That's about all that really matters here.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, like half the battle for the Cowboys was getting Diggs and Parsons to show up. So yeah, it's mostly just, you're not on Panda Watch, constantly to see who's is or isn't showing up at a practice that day. So yeah, it's now that they've got them in the fold, it's kind of more just like, all right, let's see what this looks like. How does this compare to McCarthy's mini camps? What's the energy like? Who's doing what? We're actually getting to talk about the stuff on the field as opposed to who's pissed off that they're not getting paid.
And the other thing is, like, we'll see where guys are lining up and what guys are playing with the first team and second team. Now, Brian Schottenheimer has said that they don't really do that too much in OTAs and mini camps, but there's kind of a natural pecking order with some of this stuff. So, like, if Jack Sanborn and Kenneth Murray are your first string linebackers again this week, I think that's a pretty good indication that that's how it's going to open up in training camp. Not necessarily week 1, but I think that's how they're going to start camp. Those are the kind of things that we are paying attention to.
And it's time to start bringing back the word, guys, the drum beat, right? Like, this is where the drums start, right? Like, you start to see the guys who are going to make their moves in training camp. They start it in mini camp, right? They start showing out, making big plays. I mean, again, it's 3/4 speed, no pads, it's not, but I mean, it's still, you could still see when guys are putting themselves in a position to make plays. And the drum beats, when they start, they usually kind of start near the end of minicamp. So it's time to start paying attention.
And that's where like a guy like Miles Sanders, who's kind of had that steady drumbeat of, hey, he looks like the more explosive running back. He looks really good. He's ahead of Javonte Williams. If that continues through these 2 or 3 days of practice, probably 2, at least that'll give us something to kind of look forward to throughout the rest of June and July as we get closer to training camp. So that's one of the things we're paying attention to. We want to see what George Pickens is doing. We even saw some mini camp stuff from today where Kevontae Turpin being moved around in the slot, playing a lot of slot snaps with CD Lamb and George Pickens. Little things like that is what we're paying attention to. You're not going to get a lot out of these practices, so you really have to pick and poke and see what's going on. But that's what we're trying to see here.
Was that little things comment? Was that a
no? That wasn't
Turpin short joke? Is that what that was supposed to
slip.
be? Yeah, he slips a lot, so too. That makes sense.
So again, yeah, that's what we're looking for. We'll continue to update you guys on all of the things coming out of Dallas Cowboys minicamp. Again, practices on Tuesday, Wednesday. We'll see about Thursday. Probably not, but Tuesday, Wednesday.
Probably an event, right? Probably they go out and do something or something fun. We'll get pictures. That'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. That is it for today's show. We'd like to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. You could follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier. Enjoy mandatory minicamp. Whatever we get out of it, we'll continue to break it down all week long.